John and Lauren Harris were always considered the model of a simple but happy American couple. Their house in a small town in Missouri looked almost like a postcard. A neat white fence, a front yard with a green lawn, on which their golden retriever Max ran. John worked as a mechanic at a local auto repair shop, and Lauren, having graduated from college with a degree in elementary school teaching, was already in her second year of teaching at an elementary school nearby. They met at university and have been together ever since. Life was smooth, without shocks. In the evenings, they cooked dinner together, sometimes played board games, or watched movies. On weekends, John liked to tinker in the garage, and Lauren pottered around in the garden, growing bright flowers and herbs. No one around them doubted that the Harrises were happy. When Lauren first told John that she was pregnant, he almost threw his cup of coffee. Joy overwhelmed him, and he immediately began planning the future. Lauren held his hand carefully, smiling as if she was afraid to ruin their shared moment of happiness. They both imagined how their life would become even better when children's laughter would appear in the house. Lauren's pregnancy went without complications. They chose furniture for the nursery together, discussed names, and talked for hours about what their child would become when he grew up. John was sure that it would be a boy who would follow in his footsteps and learn to fix cars. Lauren laughed, declaring that their child would definitely become a scientist or an artist because he already had a creative streak. It was enough to feel how actively the baby moved in the belly. When their son was born, they named him Owen. From the very first sight, John understood that he loved him infinitely. Small fingers, chubby cheeks, and clear blue eyes. Owen seemed perfect. Lauren beamed with happiness as she looked at her son, and John, standing next to her, suddenly realized that their family had become even stronger. As the years went by, everything really changed with Owen. The Harrises could no longer afford long evenings on the couch or spontaneous trips, but they happily accepted the new challenges associated with parenthood. John learned to change diapers faster than an iron could heat up, and Lauren, despite her fatigue, turned every day into a holiday full of games and songs. Owen grew up an inquisitive, cheerful child and quickly became a favorite of the neighbors. By the time Owen turned 3, John began to notice how his wife had changed again. Lauren thought more often, looked out the window for a long time, and sometimes got tired easily. John, already accustomed to her energy, even decided to ask one day if everything was okay. Lauren, looking down, smiled and whispered, "We're having another one." At first he thought he had misheard, but when Lauren repeated the news, holding his hand, his heart began to beat with double force again. The second pregnancy came at a time when the family was already firmly on its feet. John felt ready for new changes. This time he dreamed of a girl, but tried not to pressure Lauren in choosing a name. She, as before, trusted life and simply enjoyed the moments of anticipation. When the contractions began, John was no less nervous than the first time. They drove to the hospital, listening to the sounds of the radio, trying to distract themselves from the tension. Lauren calmed him down, as if she herself did not feel pain. At that moment, he felt the same as 3 years ago. He was again on the verge of a miracle. But what happened a few hours later was the beginning of a difficult journey for which neither of them were prepared. When the nurse brought the baby for the first time, John noticed a strange confusion on her face. She placed the bassinet in front of Lauren, smiled encouragingly, and quickly left the room. Lauren didn't pay attention to her behavior because all her attention was focused on the tiny creature who had barely begun to open his eyes. But John froze. The baby was dark-skinned. His skin was a soft caramel shade. His hair was thick and curly. John froze, as if something had jammed in his mind. He turned his gaze to Lauren, who seemed not to notice anything unusual. Her eyes shone with love and warmth, just like the day she first held Owen in her arms. But John could not ignore the obvious. It seemed to him that the room had become smaller. The walls began to press in. He could not breathe. All his thoughts mixed into a single chaotic stream. Is this a joke? A mistake? Or? He stood up, crossed the room, went to the window, trying to catch his breath. Lauren, noticing his strange behavior, asked in surprise, "Are you okay?" He turned to her, still unable to say a word. Doubt, anger, and confusion were visible in his eyes. He felt like the world they had built had suddenly begun to crumble. The Harris home, recently filled with comfort and joy, now seemed to be plunged into an oppressive silence. Returning home with a newborn girl, which should have been the happiest moment, turned into something else. John, unable to find the strength to look at the child, moved away. He spent hours in the garage, finding refuge in the hum of tools and the noise of an old motorcycle that he had been repairing for several years. He thought that the noise helped to drown out the chaos in his head, but thoughts of the baby still broke through, making his heart clench. Lauren, left with the children, tried to maintain the appearance of a normal life. She fed and put the baby to bed, played with Owen, cooked dinner, did everything to hide her anxiety. But inside, she was broken. Something strange and incomprehensible had settled between her and her husband. She felt that John had withdrawn, avoided her gaze, and their conversations were limited to short phrases and silence. Watching him drift away, Lauren realized that if she did nothing, their marriage might not survive. John, confused by his own feelings, tried to find answers. His mind clung to possible explanations. He recalled stories of rare genetic anomalies, studied family photographs, looking for even the slightest hint of hereditary features that could justify the girl's appearance. But the more he thought about it, the more certain he became that the answer lay outside their family. This house, where everything seemed perfect, was now home to suspicions that destroyed everything around it. That evening, alone in the garage, he found himself holding an old photograph of Lauren in his hands. In the picture, she was still a teenager, smiling, with light freckles on her skin and blonde hair. He had always loved her for her sincerity and kindness, for the ease with which she brought joy into their lives. But now something had changed. Fragmented thoughts kept popping up in his mind. Could she be hiding the truth? Is it possible that she betrayed me? John hated himself for these suspicions, but they grew stronger. Lauren, feeling the oppressive atmosphere, withdrew more and more into herself. She noticed how John avoided her, barely concealed his irritation or distrust. At night, she lay next to him, hearing his even breathing, but knowing that he was already somewhere far away. It was her personal struggle, every day trying to cope with the realization that their family was no longer the same as before. The girl she held in her arms was tender, defenseless, and deserved only love. But how to explain to John something that even for herself remained a mystery? Lauren struggled for a long time with the thought that something went wrong at the moment of birth. She remembered the strange behavior of the nurse in the maternity hospital, her confusion when the child was brought in for the first time. Then Lauren wrote it off to excitement. Now she was beginning to think differently. The doubts grew, turning into a firm conviction that there had been a mistake. But how was that possible? How could she prove it to John if he was already sure of the worst? Every morning, waking up, she hoped for a change, for John to look at her with warmth again, like before. But his eyes were full of tension. He tried to pretend that everything was going as usual, but their previous connection was gone. Lauren understood that this situation could destroy not only their relationship, but their whole life. However, the fear that they could lose their real daughter was even stronger. John, although he avoided Lauren, still watched her. He saw her efforts to keep the family together, but doubts did not leave him. He was tormented by questions. Why didn't she try to give a reasonable explanation? Why didn't she say anything back then, in the hospital? Instead, she was silent, as if waiting for him to figure everything out himself. This silence irritated him the most. He had grown accustomed to them sharing everything, and now he felt lonely and betrayed. It took weeks for Lauren to work up the courage to tell John her suspicions. She thought long and hard about how to do it, and eventually chose a moment when Owen was at school and the girl was sleeping peacefully. John, returning from work, found her in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, looking as if she was preparing for a difficult conversation. Her face expressed both determination and fear. When he walked in, she looked up, but did not say a word. John felt his insides tighten. He didn't know what she wanted to say, but he knew it wouldn't be an easy conversation. Lauren gathered her thoughts and quietly told him about her suspicions. She remembered those strange moments in the hospital, the feeling of alienation that wouldn't leave her. Her voice was shaking, but there was truth in her words. She believed that their child could have been switched. This thought had haunted her from the very beginning, but she was afraid to share it because she knew how it would sound. John listened without interrupting. His face was expressionless, but inside everything was seething. He wanted to object, to say that this was just an excuse, an attempt to hide something bigger. But her voice, her tears, and the fear in her eyes were too real. He couldn't ignore her words. Her confession caught him off guard, destroying all the theories he had built in his head. Now his doubts turned in a different direction. If she was right, then where was their real child? That night, John couldn't sleep for a long time. He lay next to Lauren, thinking about how their lives might never be the same. These doubts, this frightening unknown, took hold of him with new strength. But for the first time in a long time, he felt that there was a connection between them again. Not the old lightness, but something deeper. A shared desire to find the truth and return what had been lost. After Lauren confessed her suspicions to John, their home changed again. The oppressive tension that hung between them slowly began to dissipate, giving way to another emotion, an anxious determination. They both knew that they could no longer brush aside what was happening. The questions that had tormented them for weeks demanded answers, but these answers had to be found in the past. John, with his characteristic stubbornness, was not going to stop until he got to the bottom of the truth. The first thing they decided to do was contact the hospital where their daughter was born. John called there and, introducing himself, tried to find out if the staff could have made a mistake. However, the conversation quickly reached a dead end. The hospital representative assured that all procedures were followed and cases of baby substitution were practically excluded. Lauren, listening to her husband's conversation, sat in another room, clutching her daughter's tiny clothes in her hands, as if it could give her answers. John hung up and thought. His conversation with the hospital did not bring the desired result, but left an unpleasant aftertaste. Their assurances of the absence of errors sounded too formal, too detached to give him even a grain of peace. All this made him feel even more helpless. He decided that it was necessary to collect all possible evidence. The next day, John insisted on a DNA test. Despite Lauren's protests, fearing that his worst suspicions would be confirmed, she agreed. They chose a private lab to avoid unnecessary conversations in a small town where rumors spread like wildfire. The procedure was short, but the wait for the results was excruciating. John tried to distract himself by burying himself in his work, and Lauren hardly left the house, afraid to run into neighbors or acquaintances. Her thoughts were completely consumed by her children. Every time she took her daughter in her arms, her heart ached with mixed feelings. Love and pain mixed together, forcing her to be tormented by guesses. When the test results came, they both could not bring themselves to open them. The envelope lay on the table, like a letter carrying a death sentence. John slowly opened it, and Lauren watched, holding her breath. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the sheet of paper. He glanced at the text and froze. The answer was so overwhelming that he couldn't find the words right away. The results confirmed Lauren's worst fears. The girl really wasn't their biological child. John, unable to meet his wife's gaze, put the paper down on the table and went outside. There he stood for a long time, leaning against the garage door, trying to get his thoughts in order. The truth hit him with all its weight. It meant that somewhere out there in the world, there was their real daughter. And the child who was now sleeping peacefully in their house belonged to another family. For Lauren, this discovery was both a relief and a nightmare. Her suspicions were confirmed, but now they were faced with a question that they wanted to run from. What to do next? How to find the truth? What to do with the girl who had already become a part of their lives? She was sure that they could not just leave everything as it was. But the prospect of looking for another child, dealing with the hospital, delving into the intricacies of the law seemed terrifying and overwhelming. John, returning to the house late that evening, no longer avoided the conversation. They sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in a long time, Lauren felt like they were a team again. Together, they decided that they needed to do whatever it took to get to the bottom of the situation. The hospital had refused to grant them access to its records, but John, who had contacts in the local legal community, managed to get permission to obtain the medical records. These documents became the starting point for their search. A few days later, they found a clue. On the night Lauren gave birth, there was another woman in the same maternity ward. She also gave birth to a girl and was discharged a few days after Lauren. This woman's name, Angelica Martinez, was listed in the register. Without thinking twice, John found her address through friends. Lauren, despite her doubts, agreed that they should meet. When they pulled up to a small house in the suburbs, Lauren was close to panic. She didn't know how this conversation would start or how it would end. Questions were constantly spinning in her head. What if this was the wrong woman? What if they were mistaken? John, on the other hand, looked collected and determined. He knocked on the door, and a minute later it opened. A young woman with a tired face stood on the threshold, holding a child in her arms. There was caution in her eyes, but also some confusion when she saw John and Lauren. It was difficult to explain the purpose of the visit. Lauren, barely keeping her voice from shaking, told everything as it was. Angelica listened attentively, her gaze becoming more and more serious. When Lauren finished, she lowered her eyes, as if considering what she had heard. After a few minutes of silence, she quietly said that she, too, sometimes wondered about her child, noticing some inconsistencies. This response gave Lauren and John hope. Angelica agreed to conduct tests to confirm or disprove their theory. The test results confirmed the most incredible thing. The girl Angelica was raising was John and Lauren's biological daughter. Their world was turned upside down. This discovery brought both joy and confusion. Lauren and John realized that they had to make the most difficult decision in their lives. When the test results confirmed that their real daughter was being raised by another family, John and Lauren felt a strange mixture of emotions. The joy of having found their child was mixed with anxiety and confusion. What should they do? How to explain to Owen that his sister, whom he already loved, is not actually related to them by blood? And what to do with the girl who knew nothing about what happened and considered them her parents? Angelica Martinez turned out to be a sympathetic person. She was also shocked, but ready to understand this difficult situation. The woman said that she was raising her daughter alone, and the baby was the only close person for her. Hearing this, Lauren felt not only gratitude for her willingness to cooperate, but also deep pain from the realization that their families were separated because of a mistake made by others. After the first emotional meetings, John and Lauren agreed with Angelica to meet with the children in a calm environment. They chose a park where the boys rode bikes, and the mothers could talk without unnecessary pressure. Lauren, preparing for this day, thought for a long time about how to explain everything to Owen. For a 5-year-old child, the world was simple and understandable, and family ties were unbreakable. Lauren, however, knew that he would eventually have to learn the truth, and it would be better to do it gradually. Owen took the news with childish spontaneity. When he was told that the girl he called his sister was not his real sister, he looked at his mother incredulously and then shrugged. "So what?" he answered, playing with the blocks. "She's still my sister." These words moved Lauren to tears. For him, everything was so simple. In children's logic, blood and genes meant nothing if love and affection had already taken root. With each meeting, both families found more and more in common. Lauren and Angelica discussed how to live on. Each of them was afraid of losing the child she had come to love. But both understood that the best solution would be to give the children the opportunity to maintain a connection and gradually get used to the new reality. No one wanted drastic changes. They decided that they would see each other regularly and give the children the opportunity to get to know their biological parents, while remaining true to the connections that had already been formed. The process was not easy. John, who had always been self-confident, now doubted everything. He loved both girls, the one he raised as his own, and the one he was just beginning to know. Sometimes he caught himself thinking that he was afraid of the future. Will they be able to keep their family together in such a difficult situation? Will their biological daughter consider them her parents when she has spent most of her life with Angelica? Lauren, on the other hand, found comfort in this new experience. Her heart seemed to expand to accommodate her love for both children. She began to pay attention to each of the girls, trying to create an environment in which they would feel safe. Lauren even found a way to befriend Angelica. They were both mothers who had gone through a difficult experience, and this brought them together. It took several months before both families found a relatively stable routine. They continued to see each other every weekend, spending time together, walking in parks, or having picnics. Owen proved to be a key figure in bringing the two families together. He ran, laughed, and played with both girls as if their relationship had never been in doubt. His carefree nature was a reminder that children sometimes understand what is truly important better than adults. Lauren and John decided to take things slowly. They understood that time was the best healer. Gradually, both girls began to accept the new people in their lives as part of their family. Their biological daughter, Liana, often visited the Harris home, and the girl they were raising spent time with Angelica. It became part of a new reality, where two families became one. One winter day, when the snow lay on the ground like a soft white blanket, Lauren stood by the window, holding a cup of hot tea. Outside, in the garden, the children were building a snow fort. John, standing nearby, watched them, laughing at their attempts to roll huge snowballs. At that moment, Lauren felt that their family, despite everything that had happened, had become even stronger. They had survived trials that could have broken many, but instead learned to appreciate what they had. John came up to her, stood next to her, and put his hand on her shoulder. Their eyes met, and both realized that they were no longer afraid of the future. They had gone through difficulties together, preserving the main thing, love and mutual respect. Now they had not just a home, but a place where the children could grow up happy, surrounded by care and support. The path to this was not easy, but John and Lauren knew that they did everything possible to save the family, to give love to all the children that fate made a part of their lives. It was a new stage, a new chapter that began with pain but ended with peace and harmony.